the room, correct me if I'm wrong. Cool. In which case, just one last question. Can I ask one of my panelists to please keep timestamps in the chat during the speeches between like 1 minute, 7 minutes, and 8 minutes, 6 minutes and 7 minutes?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. So without further ado, to begin the debate, I'm very happy to call upon the Prime Minister.
I'm just going to grab my timer. Just to make sure, am I still audible?
Yep.
Okay, that's very nice. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Look, the problem with automation is the fact that it goes very quickly, but also has a massive impact immediately. That's to say, massive groups are immediately going to lose their jobs. Therefore, what we're going to say is we think it's important to have high employment, but also to be able to set up projects to make sure that you're going to be able to handle this in the long term, because it's still going to happen. So what I'm going to do is explain what most likely this will look like, and I'm going to explain why employment is inherently good for the individual by talking about why people want it, but also stable income. Then I'm going to have a principal point why we need to care about people, and then maybe some populism. Okay, model. Know that most likely we can just cater to specific forms of automation. Just to say, most likely this is not going to influence things like healthcare, etc., because those need specific forms of technology to be created to, have an advancement, whether their automation has to be very specific in the way that operates and robots, etc. Therefore, most likely this is going to be just specifically that, and then the ways in the info slide set. But also know, we think in general, at the moment that you do know that automation is going to happen, that also looks like two ways. First, know that you're most likely going to set in projects to make sure that you can be able to re-educate the population who's going to lose them in the long term. And also secondly, be able to cater the new education system to it, right? For example, most universities didn't actually have computer science 20 years ago. That's to say, there's a huge gap in the new market simply because of the fact that people weren't able to actually go towards these courses. Therefore, just delaying the fact that when we're going to need those more jobs, you're already going to be able to better handle those. Okay, first, why is employment inherently good for the individual? Actually, if there's First, people actually like to work specifically over just being just not working. There are two major issues. First, know that the people tend to create certain habits, but also meet certain people at the moment they're going to work. There's a steady supply, there's a very good habit, and in general, people like to do it. So that's to say, even so there's going to be like breaks where you're going to talk with people, you're going to make new friends, you're going to do these kind of things that you like, but also structurally. That's to say, you're going to meet new people specifically because of the fact that all of you need to go to work or need to go to that place. Therefore, you always are going to try to be nice to each other, and also always specifically going to try to meet people from new kind of backgrounds. And therefore, you're also specifically going to create new friends and unique friends in the fact that you just the own bubble we had before. Secondly, also know, we generally feel that people still want to feel that they are going to contribute to society, right? So here's an intuition pump. Note that most times after vacation, specifically summer vacation, a lot of people feel like I have done nothing too much. I like to go back to work. There are also some specific reasons for this, two ways. First, note that work gives them very clear goals, structure, and words. That's to say, at the moment you're going to go to job, it says, okay, now we need to fix this. And if we're going to fix this, then my boss is going to say, well, good job, etc. Now, this is very difficult to create in the same time in your private life, simply because of the fact there aren't real goals that you're going to work towards, because you're going to need to set in themselves, but also it's very difficult for humans themselves to set in the structure, but also be able to reward themselves specifically because of this and be able to make sure that they are going to work this towards this. Therefore, it's much more difficult to get this experience on this house, but also note that there's just this narrative of giving back towards society, right? Society has been giving to you, for example, the fact that you have been able to follow some form of education, the fact that you have used the infrastructure or roads, and therefore the narrative within media has always been trying to give back to a certain extent to society and not just being someone who doesn't work and therefore doesn't contribute. Secondly, also note you're much more likely to going to have a stable income at the moment you're going to work. Note that you're going to make it more difficult at the moment you're going to have, for example, government benefits. Three major reasons. First, note that right-wing governments are huge in the status quo. That's to say, there have been a lot of governments who've been cutting benefits specifically. Then why is this? So basically, this is also going to get worse on their side of the house for two reasons. First, note at the moment automation happens, that means that a big group of people are going to lose their jobs immediately. It's just whole factories, but also oftentimes whole sectors who then don't need certain jobs anymore. That is a quick amount of people, large amount of people then going to need to work. Second, meaning that's basically unable for government to immediately pay for those, specifically if you already have been cutting the funds as we've seen from the past previous years. But secondly, also note there's more resentment from the people. That's to say, at the moment that there are other individuals who do not lose their job to automations, they feel like other individuals should have done just better, right? They should have just been better educated. They should have tried harder, or it isn't their fault, specifically because of the fact that the jobs that are going to be lost are going to be lowly educated, and the higher educated people tend to believe like, well, then they should have just been more smarter, because there is a lot of elitism about people who, for example, go to university, who tend to look down on these kind of things. But secondly, also note that often this benefits tends to be conditional, right? That looks, for example, that you need to look for specific jobs, that you need to work some hours, but also sometimes quite literally, you're going to need to sit in this room for a couple of hours, and only then we're going to give you benefits, because we don't want people lurking on this benefit system and actually try to work to our society. That's to say, a lot of times it's just very shit for you as an individual to have this. The other thing, employment is always going to be the better alternatives for the individuals on the income-wise, but also generally self-accession and what they want to do. Actually, I'll take a period from closing up session.
If we take it that employment is important, how do you prove that employing people in their current job is superior to employing them in other areas where there's currently a lack?
Okay. Look, what I'm going to explain to you is, firstly, at the moment, the alternatives is the most difficult, right? So most likely these are lowly educated individuals who do specific jobs. And it's also say that jobs with different sectors would look like the jobs they've done previously before are also going to be automated immediately because they have the similar skills required. And note, it's always very difficult to re-educate these people because they are, for example, older, 40 years old. But actually, if you think on the long term, you're able to actually overcome this simply because of the fact that the infrastructure that you're going to be able to set in these projects, and governments are likely to do this, but also education is now more catered towards those sectors, etc. Also, that's a principal point. That's to say, individuals do not consent to being born in the state, yet the still state give up the right. So this, for example, looks like taxes, but also laws tell me where I can and cannot live. The state, therefore, has a duty specifically to the citizen. When you think specifically to this extremely vulnerable group, who tends to be lowly educated and unskilled, because those are jobs we can easily be automated by just a system or just a robot. So note that first of example, there's two ways that they fill them. Oftentimes, the lowly educated individuals are that because in certain areas there was not enough investment in education system or schools for them to actually go into and succeed. And also, secondly, oftentimes we see that this is intergenerational. That's to say, at the moment your parents are poor and therefore are unskilled, the most likely tends to look like you also needing to work more, for example, in your youth, to actually be able to give your money to your family. Therefore, they were unable to actually get an education, to get better, because they needed to work because the government was not providing to these poor families enough. We therefore think specifically there's this principle value against them, even if they prove it might be better for some group of society because of technology developments. We say we have a principal duty to this specific group. Also, populism. Why is this true? By the previous analysis, we're going to have a big group which we screwed over with little help from the government. This is a prime group of people who can be catered to by populists. First, they can give easy answers, saying, look, it's the immigrants' fault that they're doing this. We need strict borders. But also, secondly, notice oftentimes they're going to give an easy answer over just general structural change. That they often still need funding from rich people to actually have their campaigns, etc., or just funding from these companies. And thirdly, often it's already too late to change at that point if you have automation. Therefore, they're unable to actually change that thing. Therefore, you're much more likely to have more racism, much more likely to have more of this populism, and worse for these individuals. Vote OG.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I quickly check my panel is also ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Then I'm very happy to call upon the leader of opposition. Here.
Cool. Am I audible? Yeah. Awesome. Give me 1 second. Timer. Alrighty. Starting in 3, 2, 1, let's go. Firstly, framing. Secondly, on individuals and how they feel. Thirdly, on the economy and why, just like fundamentally, I think it's better if we have significant drive towards technological advancement on our side of the house, and why government can never get that. So firstly, then talking about the actual rate of technological advancement and automation in the status quo, because I think opening government kind of mischaracterizes that. One, I think the current role of automation is actually relatively slow. A couple of reasons for this. Note that it is incredibly expensive to do things like large-scale automation, specifically at the point at which you have to rebuild a fuck ton of factories, and you have to specifically change the fundamental nature in the ways in which they work. Not that is a huge upfront cost that lots of industries simply cannot afford to do incredibly quickly. I don't think this is the kind of thing that happens overnight. I think in the status quo, this is already something that is relatively eased in. Two, few companies can actually implement this on a large scale in the status quo, precisely because of the huge upfront cost that is involved in that, or simply because the fact that the technology specifically doesn't exist for a lot of industries in the status quo. Note that yes, it is fairly easy and for us in the status quo to automate menial labor, because that is something that we've already figured out to a large degree degree, but note that it is significantly harder for lots of other industries at the point at which we don't have the technology to accurately automate like the way, for example, like language works, so do it to the accuracy to which it would be required to actually functionally replace humans in all of their forms. Thirdly, I think there oftentimes exists like a massive fear of automation, i.e., right, like the fucking notion that like robots are going to overtake the world, or specifically the fact that the reason that like technology is going to put millions of people out of work. Understand that precisely because of this narrative, there is already incentive politically to not massively push automation, but actually relatively keep it at bay and do it in a way that is actually like relatively slow and easing it into the current economies as opposed to dropping it all on people all at once. I fundamentally do not buy that happens, because that would lead to massive political backlash. I think politicians and governments have incentives to not do this in the status quo anyway. Understand then at the point at which this is true, I think it is good to keep up the current rollout or the current rate of automation and keep implementing it rather than slowing it down. One, I think this means that people get more used to it and get used to the fact that it's going to come anyway, unless opening government wants to stand behind a world in which we don't have technological advance. I think probably these things will happen at some point or the other. I think it is better at the point at which we have a steady rate of keeping going rather than like not like slowing it down now and then having it drop at some point later in time. I think that's going to lead to worse outcomes on their side of the house, precisely the kind of like, right, like dropping it all at once and therefore having lots of people or like having the like populist backlash that they characterize as so fundamentally badly. But secondly, I think you have more incentive on our side of the house to specifically provide the kind of initiatives that they talk about, e.g. retrain or UBI. They say we can get retraining in the long term. I'm unsure why that political will exist at the point at which you have the high employment that they say they're going to get. Unsure why they're going to get that on our side of the house. I think that point falls on us. Know that also specifically when they say like, you talk about like people who are in menial labor, or I get born into that and don't consent into it. I think fundamentally, I think at the point at which this is true, and some people do just get fucked over by the birth law, that we would prefer a world where we have greater political capital, political incentives to specifically like provide these things, because that is something that you are incentivized to do at the point at which it's quite visible that there are these structural issues and you have to deal with them. Thirdly, I think this means in the long term it is significantly cheaper to roll out these kind of technologies. I think at the point at which this is probably necessary in order to keep the economy function and innovating and therefore also profitable and therefore being able to provide, for example, like cheap goods to people, then probably I think it is better to have like people already being used to it and therefore more receptive to them in the long run. Note that this also means you're probably less likely to like blame people or have specifically blame people for like not having work, and therefore also being able to specifically like get the unpleasantness of having people not feel comfortable with that technology. Understand that fourthly, I think it is important to note that I don't think government is going to get like full employment on either side of the house. One, just in terms of how the economy works, insofar as we have economic cycles and crises happen, which means that probably like people are gonna like be incentivized to do things like layoffs anyway, or companies have incentives to always be more profitable and therefore want to change up the labor forces. Or thirdly, just because of a skill mismatch in terms of the economies. I think when the state prioritizes high employment, I think there's always going to be less political capital to do other things like welfare. Note that there's always going to be people out of work. I think those people get significantly less support on their side of the house. If that's what they want to stand for, fine. I think that is a shitty world. Secondly, how do individuals feel? I think it's important to note that the kind of labor we're talking about is, as the open government says, probably then is specifically low skilled and menial labor. Note that this is already a job that isn't particularly fulfilling in the first place, as in like people are literally treated like robots already who don't have rights. Look at fucking Amazon employees. I don't think that is a very pleasant thing to be doing. Understand that these are jobs that don't pay enough. Understand that these are jobs that are already societally not seen as viewed as particularly important. I'm unsure what their intrinsic value is. We would probably prefer a world where these jobs are replaced by robots who don't have feelings, or by like machines who don't have feelings and don't have to experience the pain of not being allowed a toilet break. Understand that I'm unsure why this labor is so valuable, and on the comparative, we have a greater likelihood that people have the ability to retrain. Note that even if this isn't true and people don't get retrained, that is still a comparative that we'd rather take at the point at which it means at the point at which lots of people are out of work. I think it also just like reflects badly on your government, and it means you have to specifically like one, overturn the narratives that people who are out of work are fundamentally like flawed or are out of work because of their own personal failures, but rather point to the fact that there probably is something wrong with, I don't know, either the capitalist system or the government's failure to adequately give you a social welfare safety net. Note that that is already the discourse we have for states who have massive unemployment, where the discourse isn't that like, oh, everyone in this country is fundamentally like lazy, but rather that the state is failing to provide adequate opportunities to people. I think that gives you a greater push to actually do good stuff. I'll take closing.
Who does automation benefit?
Yeah, I think automation is probably quite good in terms of giving people cheaper goods. Not that this benefits specifically the kind of people that opening government cares about, i.e. people who are on the like lower socioeconomic ladder. Understand that at the point at which you have specifically like innovation simply becomes more costly on open government, I think you just get less of it. Understand that already getting technological advances is something that requires huge upfront investment, insofar as it means literally exploring things that have never been done before. Note that this means that there is a high chance of failure, that your investment simply isn't going to be paying off. Note that I think this is worse when you now have additional costs doing this, which means that just less investors are are likely going to fund these kind of projects, or less companies will undertake these values. I think specifically you lose out on small scale like projects or things like startups actively trying to do new things, or specifically trying niche technologies that benefit niche groups or are able to provide greater things. So that I think in the best case scenario, exclusively large companies are able to do any kind of exploration of new technologies. We think that is a worse world. We think also they are less incentivized because it's simply easier for them to keep doing the stuff and exploiting the human employees that they now know are going to be provided to them by the state, because that is something they can fundamentally rely upon. I think you lose out specifically on that innovation. Note that I think that innovation is specifically good at the point at which oftentimes, one, it gives you things like cheaper goods because you can produce more at a larger scale, i.e. if you can have a machine do things at 3 times the speed than a human, then probably that means you have to spend less money to produce those goods, meaning that ultimately at the bottom line, you have greater possibility of those goods being cheaper. We think this benefits the most vulnerable people in society. Secondly, I think it makes available services that we didn't know we needed in the first place, and just making life easier in ways that we couldn't have possibly imagined. E.g., look at the computer and the internet. It's not something we thought we needed, but now it massively has impacted and improved our lives. Thirdly, I think it's just good for societal progress, i.e. note that lots of technologies are incredibly liberating, i.e. at the point at which we had lots of household items exist on specific, in terms of the microwave or the washing machine made it possible for women to go to work because they had to spend less time standing in the kitchen and cooking, because that is what society expected of them. Look, I think on the comparative, probably bad companies always have incentives to push for cheap labor. I think they just go to the developing world on Gov side. We think that is a worse comparative. For all of those reasons, opening opposition.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their speech. Can I quickly check my panel is also ready?
Yep.
Yes.
And I'm very happy to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Am I audible like this?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Before I start, my family is watching. I love that you're watching. Calvin, Jullie. I will try not to speak too fast. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Look, even if opening up is able to prove to you that we get slightly more cheap goods, then we say this is a very marginal thing, simply because we think these people tend to be happy off anyway. We don't think it's that much of a difference at the moment that my phone is now 100 euros less expensive. At the moment that we hand in back for that lots of people will be out of their job, which we think is very problematic. What I'm going to do is firstly, why automation is likely to go on a rapid pace, then why we basically cannot afford change for these people that will be the victims of it, then explain why these jobs are so important and weigh that off. So first, opening up gives a few reasons why automation is likely to go slow. They say it's hard for other industries, and there's a fear people get used to it, etc. So firstly, reality check. Know that already many have lost a job. Things like laundry machines have already led to people not being able to work, for example. Secondly, we tell you we buy more time to actually get people to reschool for this. Looking like things. Hey, this is something that is not easily be done by machines in the next coming years. This is something we're going to train you on to actually give you that time. We think that is way better on our side because we actually get that time. Secondly, on the idea of people fear robots anyway, I think this is true for the incentives of states. It's just not true for the incentives of companies, which is to say that these companies are very likely to only be profit-oriented, care only for the amount of profit that they make, as they have to police their shareholders instead of citizens. I don't think they're very likely to change anything of that. They say, but you can get used to it. I think we have a way better way to actually get used to AI at the moment that is not actively taking your job away from you. I think that drastically decreases the fear and a feeling of the state that actually cares for you. And we say, two more reasons why it goes rapid. Firstly, because readaptation is very easily at the moment that you already have some kind of technology. It's very easy to apply it elsewhere. But secondly, it's just relatively cheap. Opening government says it's expensive to readapt. We say, look, that's only an investment that you need to make once. Whereas at the moment that you have to keep a working force in your company for more than a year, that's probably is a lot more expensive. Lots are going to be doing this. So why are we unlikely to actually be able to pay for this? So we say that, look, opening government says these people are not going to like the jobs anyway, unfulfilling. We say we must rather have them working because we basically don't really have an option for them. Firstly, because we see that governments will very much lack the funds to actually compensate the people that have now lost their jobs. Why is this? Because we see there is a massive lobby from companies to not actually have a lot of taxes, for the simple reason that they will just go to a different country then. We already see countries like the Netherlands and Panama being massive tax havens because they are simply doing a race to the bottom. It's a collective action problem at which companies can lobby in each country to make the standards as profitable as possible for them. Otherwise, they go to a different country. That is to say, each country where this company will not be located will simply not benefit from taxes at all. And even the ones where they go to will simply have such low taxes that it will not actually change a lot. Why is that so bad? Because we see we actively need these taxes in order to recompensate people, as we think it's not very likely that the salaries of people that keep working go up, because again, there is a massive profit incentive. That is to say, we ultimately, under their side, we have lots of people that frankly don't have a job anymore and don't have any way to compensate it, like we do in status quo. Things like not paying your rent, not paying your groceries or your hobbies, and all kinds of things that make life fun living are not possible under their side at the moment that you've lost a job, because there's no alternative for you. Before I'm going to go on, LSE?
Yeah, if capital flight is a problem in case of taxation, why does it happen in this case?
Because we see that at the moment people are not working. You need this taxation more than ever. At the moment that falls away, you have a massive problem. On our side, we have people getting money themselves. We can tax that. I think that's a lot easier than fighting in the lobby of Amazon and stuff. So firstly, we say that already is a reason why we much rather have these people working over these people not working, simply because they can actually have the life necessities. But Piotr gives you two more reasons. He firstly tells you a feeling of contribution is important. At the moment that you're not work, even if you can afford it, it harms your feeling of dignity. You have a feeling as though you matter at the moment that you're working. Even if one of the opposition teams is going to go up and said, yeah, voluntary jobs, we say the more fun ones tend to be automated anyway, which is to say that you're likely to end up in the less fun jobs, such as cleaning your area, which is less likely than actually have a job where you contribute actively something and get paid for that. But secondly, Piotr specifically explains this is about the most vulnerable ones that will not be able to actually do the best kind of voluntary work. That is to say, we lose a lot of the feeling of contribution, a deep feeling of dignity within people that cannot be expressed easily by them, but a constant crippling feeling of I'm not contributing now because I've been taking this opportunity away. But we think that on top of that, we say it gives a feeling of stability. You have something to get out of bed for. We think this is very important for people because you can set goals, you can set targets, things you want to learn at your place. It can actually lead to growth and self-actualization. You can learn what you like and not what you don't. This is unique to our side because these goals are very hard to set at the moment that you don't have a strict thing that is motivating you. We all get demotivated sometimes. We all don't do our uni work sometimes, especially when we don't learn to do so. We think that at the moment there is no such thing that is giving you a strong feeling that you should do so. You're unlikely to do so, which means that you actualize yourself ultimately worse. But it also means that your trust in the state is likely to decrease at the moment that you are denied from a way to actually provide for yourself and do the things that you like. How do we specifically weigh this into the round? We say that even if opening opposition can claim a bigger group, we see these people are very well off anyway. At the moment, we get more expensive costs on our side. We're fine to bite that bullet. I really don't care for that. We see that firstly, there's still a profit incentive coming from companies, meaning that they're unlikely to drastically drive down the prices. But even if they do, then we say at the moment that I can buy a bit of a cheaper iPhone that probably doesn't weigh up against me not getting a job at all, because we see that each penny that I'm now going to have to pay less for it is already stripped away from me at the moment that I don't have a job and an income. But we see secondly, we have an active duty towards this group. We see that the states have seen benefits of automation in the past, but these people barely have. People don't choose where they are born. They never consent, yet the state takes from them. That is to say, these people are firstly dependent upon the state and has a way of actually providing for them. Why do we think dependency is important? Very intuitive. We see that parents should have a duty towards the children at the moment that they're young, because these children cannot provide for themselves. At the same way that parents have a duty towards the children, we say that the state has a duty towards its citizens, especially at the moment that they have never consented to it. But secondly, in reciprocity, in terms of when we have paid taxes to the state, we have allowed the state to build up. We've done things to change it and make it better. We think that at that point, the state has to do something back for me. I think it's not much harder to explain than at the moment that Piotr gives me a tenner and a hug now. I probably want to give him a tenner and a hug back later. We say that ultimately, therefore, the state has the biggest duty towards its individuals to actually fulfill them in the thing they need the most in life. We say that even if this is not a job that is the most fulfilling, it is still something that makes life worth living. I'm very proud to propose. I'm sorry if I was still too fast, Opa.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I quickly check my panel is also ready?
Yep. Yes. All good.
And I'm very happy to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, fine. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, dealing with the comparative. Secondly, talking about individuals. Thirdly, about the larger economic comparative that we have in this debate. Firstly, I think that it's quite important that, notice that opening government did not fully respond to the characterization that Vicky offers to you as to why it is likely that we have a long time to actually deal with all of the systematic issues that they talk about. They just assert that this is something that's happening quickly, but they don't deal with the structural things that Vicky tells you. But all companies just genuinely don't have the money to do it. Notice, especially if closing government wants to run an extension that all the rich people are going to control it, then I would just posit that they're also the ones that are going to put patents on it and say only a couple companies are able to do it. What this means is that it's not always industry-wide, it's not all companies happening. So I think that it is going to be incremental, and that is the thing that gives us the buffer to do all of the things like retraining or providing UBI. I think that that is the comparative that we stand for in this debate. We don't have to protect, but also if you look at the history, the fact that I don't know, computers have existed, but boomers still decide to print everything out and not use digital passes when they want to fly on an airplane shows that just people don't accept the solutions as quickly as possible, even if companies have the profit incentive to offer all of those solutions. So I don't think that opening government is winning on the this happens too fast comparative. They want to portray you that the government has a duty to the most vulnerable people, yet the link that they fail to explain to you is why they have a duty to provide a job rather than to provide a dignifiable life. I think at a point at which we're able to prove to you that we can do things like retraining, or we can do things like a UBI, which are significantly better for a dignifiable life, we are fulfilling that duty. They talk about populism. One, they never actually tell me why populism is inherently bad if it caters to groups that are otherwise left out of politics generally. But secondly, you have a large group that are easy voters. I think that they're the ones that are going to just demand the most things, are you getting a UBI? Because otherwise the government is going to get voted out of office if they don't deal with the large group of vulnerable people who are now going to be left jobless. The stuff that OG wants to tell you about retraining over a long period of time, they actually never explain to you how anyone will want to fund this at a point at which your government is literally telling you, oh, don't you ever worry about technology or automation, you're guaranteed jobs for the rest of your life. At that point, no one is going to give the political support to put shit tons of funding into retraining people and taking them away from their jobs. This is counterintuitive to every single voter. But secondly, if automation is the thing that increases productivity, that is actually the thing from which governments can get tax money in order to provide for things like UBI or provide for money for things like retraining, which we only enable. OG just asserts they have this money to get from somewhere. I don't know where. I think if they have fiat to do so, we have fiat to say we're going to do UBI. Let's compare this then to the stuff about how individuals are going to engage with this, because OG wants to win this on meaning of work. At the same time, when they talk about the most vulnerable groups who are stuck in the shittiest jobs ever, I'm genuinely unsure what is the meaning of work you get from being an Amazon warehouse worker who regularly goes to the media to tell about your struggles that Jeff Bezos is not giving you a break. I don't know when on their side of the house they get the benefit of work is fun because you talk to other people. If you're sitting at a conveyor belt and you are unable to talk to anyone else because you also don't have break time to do so, I think on the comparative it is significantly better that you're able to talk to your family, who are people you have chosen to be around you, who you love, but on their side of the house you don't even have time to do so because you work such long hours for such small amount of pay that you're never able to enjoy time with the people who matter to you the most. The second thing they tell you is you want to contribute to the society and have goals because the media narrative tells you so. I would just posit that over a long term that media narrative is going to change, but also that it's just a capitalist hoax that people get meaning and enjoyment out of work or out of contributing to the society. I think these are things you can get outside of work, and I genuinely do not believe that most people who are doing those most minimum wage jobs feel like they're providing some massive benefits to the rest of the society. They know that Jeff Bezos is evil and just profiting off of it. We'd rather not have those jobs, and on a comparative, people enjoy their free time when having UBI. I think that the clash in perception when they say you should have been smarter or better to not get your job lost by automation is a clash that we win at a point in which we tell you that it's it's quite obvious when automation takes away jobs, no one is going to blame you for it. But secondly, perception about what your job is or in a society that's just so focused on work being the central thing to your identity is significantly worse because people genuinely don't have control over what their background is or what their access to jobs is or how much employers subjectively like them. I think what they do have control over is things like, where are my friendships? What are my values? What my personality is like? At a point at which work is no longer the most central thing to your personality, I think that there is significantly better perception and people getting along on our side. They want to say, at least work gives you stable income. One, this income is shit, at a point at which Vicky tells you that when you have guaranteed labor, companies have no incentive to actually provide competitive wages. Secondly, it's not stable at a point in which you're so replaceable because the government is telling you we're just constantly pumping in people who can fill out all of those menial jobs. Unclear what that benefit is. UBI is just genuinely more stable. The second thing they say in like their speeches, like, I don't care if my iPhone costs 100 euros less. I would just say that that's really fucking privileged. And like most people do actually care about that because that's just significant to the life they live. You want to protect the most vulnerable. You also need to protect them to have access to things like, I don't know, food and medication, which goes significantly cheaper on our side of the house if you have all of the technological development. Notice that that is the thing that they just failed to respond to. When we could give you a bunch of reasons as to why this technological innovation will fundamentally not happen on their side, even if they fiat out like medicine. I think all of the other things, I don't know, developing technology that will allow us to escape this planet is something that is probably more important, and the thing that we get access to, they never respond to it. Before I move on, closing government.
In status quo, automation is already happening behind the scenes in things like Amazon warehouses. In your best case, Amazon is the only company which is able to automate further. And why would you be against getting money?
I'm going to respond to one last thing from opening government, then I'm going to do the inequality comparative, don't worry. So talking about the stuff that OG in their last speech is like, everyone goes to tax havens. One, this house believes that motion. I would just posit that your best case is that every single country is doing this policy. Otherwise, we could claim all kinds of bad things on our side, but we're just being charitable that like companies are going to do, or like countries are going to do this like fairly in different places. I don't care why tax havens matter. Also, like other governments that are not the US can get money, not a problem. I think the comparative is significantly worse at a point at which companies, like you say, are always going to want to maximize their profits. At that point, they have the question of whether are we able to automate or can we get cheaper labor elsewhere? At a point at which they decide to go to developing countries where you already in the status quo have the cheapest labor, they're just going to go there and exploit it. The reason why this is harmful is because these people with the weakest governments have the least labor protections ever. So they're the ones that are going to get exploited the most on their side of the house. And at that point, these are people that are not going to get any type of meaning from work, but they're just going to die because they have no health and safety standards. Last comparative on the inequality, because I think that we're genuinely winning over the long term, but in case that's the case, the closing government wants to run. I think that the inequality in status quo is already so high that the comparative we would rather have is that people are not forced to be exploited in jobs that they need to do every single day and things that they do not enjoy. Even if CG runs the case like, labor is our largest bargaining power, I would say that this just fundamentally has failed to work in our modern society and something that wouldn't happen. But even if that is the case, and you have lots and lots of poor people on our side of the house or people who are out of work and a few of the rich still control the world, I think you still have the power of the masses that can just raise up and like do have like political responses to the situations that are happening. Those are all things that are rather possible on our side and would rather defend a possibility in which we have a long-term possibility of getting used to this type of thing, so we don't end up in a dystopia that they would rather end up in a situation where technology just comes super abruptly, because at one point just paying for the like taxes on automation is just cheaper than not using this automation. For all those reasons,
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for a very fine speech. Can I quickly check my panel is also ready?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, then I'm very happy to call upon the member of government. Here.
I will be taking POIs in the chat, please. Cool. Right. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's take O out of this debate. First of all, their own framing shows you that there probably isn't going to be much of a change on price. Currently, companies are automating, but prices aren't decreasing. Actually, they're probably increasing. decreasing in the last few years. And the reason for that is, as they say, relatively few companies are automating and have like a stronghold on, how much is automated. Therefore, they don't need to compete with a plentitude of companies who are automating. Therefore, they don't need to decrease prices a lot in order to be competitive with other companies, which means that there is a very, very marginal, if any, decrease in prices. Compare that to literally losing your job. As shitty as it is, if you signed up to work in Amazon, it is probably because you need the money that Amazon is willing to give you, meaning if you lose that money, no matter how much cheaper things are, you still can't afford them because government benefits, the way that they're set up now, run out, right? Like you can be on state benefits for different countries, it's different times, but it's usually 6 months or 2 months or up to a year, depending on the country. But like at a certain point, they run out. And the problem is that in status quo, there is no money like that the state has to give you as a person who's lost their job to automation, and no political will for the state to give you those money for you to be able to re-educate yourself. But given the fact that state benefits are currently barely enough to cover your basic necessities, it's unlikely that you'll be able to re-educate yourself without additional money. Second response to OO, they tell you, oh, we have UBI incentive on our side of the house because of like no reason, or at least I didn't hear one. Maybe they'll tell me in a POI, but basically there is no UBI incentive on their side of the house. As they tell you, people get more used to this technology coming around. They get more used to not being scared of it, and therefore are less willing to listen to people like Andrew Yang. And like he gets fucking 5% in the primaries and doesn't get any sort of votes. Cool. What I will prove to you today is that on our side of the house, it is most likely that there will be the political will to create a scheme that covers people's livelihoods who have lost their jobs to automation. Note that this is not necessarily only like menial workers. It's probably also people like, investment bankers, 90% of whose job can be automated because it's literally like linking Excel sheets and like taking data out of this cell and putting it in the other cell and like running simple calculations. Cool. First of all, why like automation will happen anyway on both sides of the house? Look, don't tell you why we like significantly slow automation to the point where like it's hampers human development. I think automation will probably still happen to an extent because like there's a lot of people who are just interested in it, like Elon Musk, who like this is their life journey and they have a lot of money to invest in it. Second of all, there's probably a lot of incentive because like a lot of companies, if they can let go of their workers, they probably are going to be still on the plus side, even though they're taxed and even though there's like other restrictions around it, because of the fact that workers are probably the biggest expenditures, right? Like they don't work all of the time, but you do have to pay them for like their entire life. So often like supporting families, paid leave, etc. Cool. Why do we get more political capital for a scheme that supports people long term rather than the current scheme, which like runs out after 11 months of unemployment? Several reasons for this. First of all, workers.
When you use your political capital and budget to incentivize high employment, you cannot also push for other policies such as extensive welfare. If you take it at your best and lots of people are suddenly out of work, this creates urgency to respond. You never get that, but you still get unemployed poor people.
I'm not sure why like you need to use your political capital in order to get those. Like, we get the policy on our side. Cool. First of all, workers have more bargaining power than non-working people for several reasons. First of all, like they can unite in things like unions and use their money to fund politicians and fund politicians' campaigns in order to get them elected. And like the workers who are most likely to get their jobs automated are most likely to to unite in those unions and those kinds of things. I think that the comparative here is that probably those workers lose their jobs a lot earlier on side opposition, and therefore there's less time for them to unite around politicians who want to give them those types of schemes and like support the candidate and actually get them elected. Second of all, like generally workers aren't seen as leeches on society, and that means that the general public is more likely to unite around their cause rather than like be disparaged by a populist saying, oh, they don't deserve this money. Second reason why we're more likely to get a scheme that supports people whose jobs have been automated long-term on our side of the house, it's the optics of capacity, right? Like OG tells you, oh, you know, we have more money on our side of the house, so therefore this money will be given there. I think that the important mechanism that they miss is like, why do people decide to apportion money to different causes? Is they only are willing to do that when they don't think that money is going to be taken away from the things that they care about. So in the side of the opposition, when you're not taxing automation, it's much more likely that people will think that this money will go to things that will be taken away from things like their schools, their hospitals, and all those kinds of things. So they're much more likely to be opposed to any scheme that like gives this sort of lifeline to people who have lost their jobs. 3, optics of deservedness, right? Like if we do this before people have lost their jobs already, because, we're slowing automation somewhat, it means that basically you're not seeing those people as, trying to take away from you, but rather as people who are working for the country and therefore deserve this. Finally, just to add to this is probably like just in terms of justification why we're justified in taxing companies, because like the government has provided them all the resources in order for them to automate, right? It has provided them an educated workforce. It has provided them all the facilities and the infrastructure, including like literally the minerals that they extract in order to build the machines, which means that those companies have to give something back to support the government when it needs to. Please vote CG.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I quickly check my panel is also ready?
Yes.
Yep.
And I'm very happy to call upon the member of opposition. Here.
Hello, want to check if I'm audible?
Yep.
Cool. Panel GovBench loses this debate because if governments push for policies that seek to pursue high employment rates, that doesn't translate into that policy necessarily working and getting the high employment rate that they want. I want you to look at your notes. There is no mechanism for why this does so, just an assumption that companies will just do this and therefore it will happen. So the second thing I want to note, and just quickly taking CG out of this debate, which is they say automation happens on either side and blah, blah, blah. But if the point is automation happens on either side, they don't get the kinds of benefits that they want. If they want like unions to like influence politics, blah, blah, all of that sort of stuff requires you to significantly stifle automation such that you can replace it with lots of laborers, not like, I don't know, like a minuscule amount. The high employment rate stuff means that you must push for a hard prop of this policy. All of the rebuttals will be integrated. We're going to be the first team in this round in which we're going to say this policy is not going to work because it will create more unemployment. The second thing I want to talk about is why that unemployment is necessarily going to be bad. The third thing I want to talk about is the ancillary benefits that you lose out on. And fourthly, I'm going to do much more than there's unemployment, so people will also push for UBI, and we have some political capital. We have fiat. We're going to use this here. Okay, first of all, why do we create unemployment? 2 questions over here. Who uses AI and extremely productive technologies? I think there's a consensus in this debate that the biggest corporations, the ones that can afford to, develop these sorts of technologies, buy these sorts of technologies, put in money for research, all those sorts of corporations are the ones going to use this. But I think the second question that's been missing from this debate is who hires the majority of fucking workers in developed and developing economies? That is not the biggest corporations in the world, panel. Sure, you might have a large factory that employs 50,000 people, but the problem is the vast majority of workforces in countries like America, but also in the European Union, are actually employed by small and medium-sized enterprises for the simple structural reason that millions of these enterprises exist. So even if they, hire like 5 people on a fucking farm, the millions of farms means that they hire a lot more people on net than these sorts of corporations. Our case is then that you crucially screw over these corporations or these medium-sized and small-sized enterprises at the point at which you institute this tax. Now, we are going to assume the best case of Gov world. All companies follow this. The tax rates are so high that they must necessarily hire workers and not go for automation. What's the problem? Obviously, automation leads to cheaper goods being produced than hiring workers. Workers are much more inefficient. They can't produce that much in a single day. All of those sorts of reasons. What is the problem then in terms terms of this being a more expensive thing. Now, I want you to think about Ford, for instance, which manufactures lots of trucks. Now, if Ford tractors are being used by farms all across America, a $5,000 increase in the price of one unit of a tractor means a lot for small and medium-sized farms. This probably means that they cannot hire 1 or 2 additional workers per year, and those people lose their jobs. So the question is, where the fuck do these people go in their world? And I think that the problem is your large-scale sector does not have the capacity to absorb all of these sorts of people coming from also lots of areas where these companies have no presence whatsoever. Where do they go? So I think the problem is unemployment actually rises in their world. You might create some employment in terms of large companies, but lots of smaller companies and organizations are screwed. But the second thing I want to also note is you also create employment in the status quo, but also good for the economy stuff in the status quo, because automation literally gives an incentive for companies to stay home. Guys, it's already cheaper for them to produce abroad in India, Pakistan, China, whatever. Automation is the one unique comparative advantage you give to companies to stay in your in the boundaries of your country. Why is this crucial then? Because if these companies move out, the problem is you don't collect taxes from them. You don't also get access to say cheaper transportation costs for all of the businesses within your country. So it becomes a lot more economically inefficient. The logic of this argument then is, 1, unemployment rises, but 2, if you don't get companies to stay home, you don't get the taxes for all of those kinds of re-education or whatever welfare benefits you want to talk about. Okay, the second thing then, if we do create employment, is that good? I don't know why nobody in this debate has analyzed what corporate incentives look like. I would just posit that corporations want highest amounts of production at lowest amounts of cost so that they can get as much profit as possible. That incentive does not change on either side of the house. So at the point which you do this, what do corporations do? Now, O says there's an incentive to provide stable wages because there's labor shortages and so on and so forth. I don't think that mechanism makes sense. At the point which you institute these kinds of taxes, but also you've created an artificial inefficiency which increases the cost, corporations are likely to lobby for lesser taxes on other ends, which means less welfare overall. But 2, they're also likely to lobby for things like lower minimum wage, means things like lesser labor regulations, lesser safety standards. So these jobs are likely going to be like Amazon fucking jobs where people are working 12 hours a day, literally wearing adult fucking diapers because they can't go to the washroom, exposing themselves to safety hazards and so on and so forth. I am really uncertain why this job is going to be good for these people, especially considering that the workforce which is exhausted, which is exploited like this, has worse mental health outcomes on our side. I'll take OG.
Even if you prove medium enterprises are now not going to automize anymore, your best case is Amazon slightly more expensive. Ours is the weakest giving a chance to basic self-provision.
No, that's what I'm saying. The number of the weakest increases in your world because the medium-sized businesses cannot afford this, and the small marginal change might not make a lot of sense for large companies, but for smaller companies, that small marginal change eats into their profit margins, which means that they cannot employ these kinds of people. Okay, last thing then in terms of ancillary benefits, I want to note that OG takes this out by saying, oh, we're not applying this to medical technologies, but I want to note the vast majority of AI development happens in the corporate world. The medical world does not have the funding to do this. They oftentimes just put in money to get better drugs or whatever, right? So I think the problem is once you create technologies in this sphere, if you ban the creation of those technologies, other sorts of technologies don't develop downstream. And this means that your stuff like, nanotechnologies, which use AI to do stuff like surgeries, all of those sorts of things never happen in your world. I don't know why we've assumed that we are the pinnacle of human development. Lots of these technologies, we can't even fathom what they're going to be, but will help other people much more in the future. Okay, lastly then, in terms of, why their stuff on the comparative doesn't work. Okay, they said there's something like political capital that you lose, and also the fact that if people are unemployed, then they're going to push for stuff. I think OG is correct to point out that probably there's going to be some populism. They can blame other people. I'm going to tell you why populism is likely going to be left-wing, and therefore they're not going to blame other people. They're going to blame the fucking elite. Okay, and this also directly clashes with the elite point, like coming out from CG. The first thing is to note that there are incentives for labor to organize at the point at which there's mass unemployment happening. Yes, the labor union doesn't exist because you're not labor, but your connection still exists. So organization is at the pinnacle, and they're going to blame technology because the immigrant worker doesn't even exist. The immigrant worker also lost his fucking job because he's also an unskilled person. But secondly, I want to note this leads to a rise in social unrest, rates of crime increase, there's a reduction in buying power for consumers, which means that your economy is at systemic risk, which is why governments rationally are going to want to give things like UBI, increase stuff like capital income taxes, and also do stuff like make government infrastructure work, such as the Biden plan, and give people employment. For all these reasons, panel, very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Can I quickly check my panel is also ready?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm very happy to call upon the government whip.
Cool. Am I audible and visible?
Yep.
Fine. I'll begin. I perform my POIs in the chat. I'll take one from opening sometime around 5. I'll begin in 3, 2, and 1. Panel, let's look at what CEO brought to you, right? First off, they came and said, oh, look, you have no mechanism for getting welfare, right? In your best case, our worst case, unemployment happens anyway because automation is going to happen. Panel, let's read the motion a bit, right? It says things like, let's keep quotas for employees. Let's tax automation. At the very least, panel, we think keeping quotas for employees is going to ensure at least some more workers are now employed versus their side where you don't have these minimal quotas, right? So at the very least, right, even if we take the very best case assertion, we still get more employment on our side, right? Let's move on to what else they said. They came and told you, look, who uses AI? First of all, large corporations, but they don't care about large corporations. But that's cool, right? Let's deal with what they care about. They care about the small and medium enterprises who employ the bulk of Americana and all the population, right? Let's tell you what happens, right? They told you a story about the farmer who employs a Ford tractor, which is now expensive. And from the 5 people he now employs, he has to cut 1 or 2. Let's tell you what happens if we didn't tax automation. Panel, at this point, he's not going to buy a Ford tractor anymore. He's going to buy a Ford harvesting combine, which makes all 5 workers redundant, right? He's just going to sit in his combine and do the work that his 5 workers used to do and get all the rewards because now he can automate that thing, right? At the point at which we're not taxing automation, automated products are the products that big firms, which they don't care about, are going to be selling and are going to be pushing down to the common people. So their best case, panel, is 1 or 2 out of every 5 workers get unemployed. But when automation is allowed to go at the progress at the rate it is, not 1, not 2, but all 5 of his workers are now going to be redundant and literally aren't going to have a job, right? At this point, on the unemployment metric, right, which most teams in this debate have, assuming, since it's the employment motion, we assume that's probably the most important metric, right? On that metric, we take CO, right? But let's tell you, they came later and said, oh no, look, the only reason people stay in the boundaries of your beautiful country is automation, right? Otherwise, they'll just go off to another country, right? Panel, why do we care about companies staying in our country? 2 reasons, right? 1, the wages they pay. Spoiler alert, if they automate, they aren't going to be paying too many wages for your employees anyways, right? They aren't going to have too many employees in your country and they aren't going to be paying wages. So you're going to benefit from them in that way, right? Let's talk about the other thing they said. Oh, the taxes they pay. Panel, spoiler alert, does Amazon pay taxes? Does Google pay too many taxes? Sure, Ireland is probably going to make some money on taxes at the end of the day, but the USA is not, the UK is not, the developing countries all over the world are not, and everyone is still as crude as they were before this, right? At this point, we don't see any benefit for having these large corporations in your country. If they think it's more profitable to go to a developing country, sure, let them do that, right? Because I think they assume that, oh, look, let's assume that this happens all over the world, right? Sure, automation is going to happen even in the developing countries then, and it's still going to be taxed in the developing countries. If they want to go to India and then pay taxes there, sure, it benefits the Indian economy. We don't really care at this point, right? Somewhere in the economy, somewhere in the world, people are going to benefit just from the taxes that have been paid, right? CEO out of this debate already. Let's tell you what OO did, right? OO made this very big flaw where they didn't seem to actually recognize what actually is being automated, right? They told you the most menial tasks are being automated. The Amazon warehouse tasks are being automated. Panel, let's talk about what jobs look like, right? In every job, you have some sort of routine task and you have non-routine tasks, right? These routine tasks look like things like, okay, copying data from one spreadsheet to another. And in the other side of the spectrum, it looks like things like Amazon warehouse jobs, right? So we tell you that Amazon warehouse jobs will definitely get completely automated. Truckers will also probably get somewhat automated because trucking is going to get automated. But on the other side of the spectrum, you still have 90% of what you call a professional jobs also being automated, right? At this point, we think unemployment isn't just going to hit the people at the menial jobs end of the spectrum, but it's going to affect people on all scales, right? And this automation is a much, much more potent problem than they want you to believe it, right? Go ahead.
We actually take government at their best and tell you what, even with high unemployment, you still glorify labor and no one will agree to pay UBI to people for not doing work when they could. When there is no more work to actually do, you change that notion and you can have political capital to do things like UBI.
Great. Thanks for telling us why we beat OG, right? Because that's what OG assumed. But Zahari's analysis told you why we get that political capital for a change, right? For foreign UBI. But I'll go on to that in a bit, right? Because I'm still not done with what the rest of your case, right? After all this panel, let's tell you what they have, right? Because on their side of the house, they don't have any taxes. They don't have any fiat to sort of get this thing, right? Oh, on the matter of fiat again, right? They came and told you, oh, look, guys, you don't have the political capital to make these policies, right? Panel, if the motion assumes the political capital to raise taxes via automation, we've just used the fiat to spend that raised capital, right? We aren't creating more policies in any sort of way. We're just using the exact same fiat the motion gives us, right? Which unfortunately, they don't seem to have, right? So they can't come and tell you, oh, look, we'll also have a UBI, we'll also have X, we'll also have Y, because that simply doesn't exist, right? They don't have the money for that, because the money for this UBI policy is only coming, the money for the reskilling policy is only coming from the taxes we are levying on automation, right? At that point, they're out, right? But they tell you one more thing. Oh, look, if unemployment is actually that scary, you'll have the power of the masses, right? Everyone's going to come together and revolt. Panel, no one really cares, right? In today's world right now, governments are already owned by corporations, right? And this is the world where people still have jobs, where people can still go out and vote, right? Corporate lobbies are a thing, advertising is a thing, propaganda is a thing, and they control more minds than just, let's go fight for our rights, right? But this is going to be so much more worse in a world where the elite has all the money, right? Because OO conceded that that's likely to happen in their case, right? Wherein you automate literally everything. The only people making money are Jeff Bezos and his board at this point, and everyone else is just vibing unemployed, right? At that point, when the only people who matter, the only people with any sort of money and any sort of political capital at this point are the richest of the rich, no one's going to care about the poor people because the government is going to be completely captured with all the money that they can throw at them, right? When there's no sort of competing interest, there's no sort of funding for competing interest, nothing matters, right? Okay, let's tell you what OG told you and how we sort of got over that, right? First of all, OG had this sort of thing on people liking to work. Maybe not that important, right? And also OG had relied a lot of their case on the speed of technological change, which is also contrasted with OO, right? We got around this by telling you that irrespective of what the speed is, there's still going to be unemployment because automation is going to happen, panel. No, Zahari is the only one who gave you 3 reasons why automation is likely to happen, even if we tax it, right? He told you that there's some people who would do it anyways, that in some sectors it's going to be cheaper. And once someone does it, it's going to trickle down either way, right? At this point, panel, you just need to keep in mind that we're the only side which told you and gave you reasons why at that point, right, that automation is going to happen, you are going to be able to tax it. And Zahari also told you why this tax will be diverted to a UBI. Incredibly proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for a very fine speech. Can I quickly check my panel is also ready?
Yes.
And I'm very happy to call upon the opposition here.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Right. This is going to be a very world schools speech because apparently the debate requires it. First, on why they never justify as to why this policy is necessary. Secondly, why they never justify as to how this policy is effective. But thirdly, on various different externalities that this policy ensues from, this policy creates, and why they never trade off those externalities in a way that we would know why, why are we willing to take all of these negative effects? Firstly, on necessity. Look, in the opening, we have discussion around, oh, this change is going to be super rapid, or this change is going to be super slow, and each seems on their side. Let's take them at their best and say, okay, maybe this change is super rapid, even though we've been debating this motion literally for the past 15 years at this point, since I was in primary school, right? But then let's say it's super rapid and tomorrow everyone loses their job. They say we need to slow it down because then we're gonna be able to use this money that we've taxed on re-educating people. My question is, why would we use that? Just because a government is taxing something, it doesn't mean it will allocate it towards a more useful capacity. Look, we tax people all the time and we don't, we don't invest in better healthcare. We don't invest in better schools. We don't invest in things that people want to see. You need to have a mechanism, both in opening government and closing government, that, by the way, claims that they provide one, on why this money is going to be used in a way that is likely to benefit people at the point, especially when those people are employed in those jobs, and at the point where companies are already irritated around having been regulated around it. We say there's no mechanism explaining to you why this re-education happens. But secondly, I'm not clear as to re-education for what jobs exactly. Like, where are you putting those people? What is your counter plan? We tell you, look, if anything, we're slowly moving people into other types of jobs that we have structural lacks in, such as caring for the elderly, such as caring for people that are sick. All of those service economy things that are happening anyway and are happening rapidly anyway, that don't require massive re-education. And especially when we tell you massive re-education. But then secondly, we're also seeing a massive trend of increasing social benefits. Like, literally, US realized that you need to give people at least like $800 a month for them to survive. Why? Because there's a large gap in the market. These are the trends that we are seeing. Like, the welfare state is expanding even in the country that doesn't seem to believe in the welfare state. So I'm not sure what is the necessity of this policy as in terms of the trend we are seeing. Secondly, I'm not sure why this is the best policy to employ people, and why is one comparative to putting them in service economy or in construction, as we are seeing per trend in the current moment. Why are you weighing and solve why is the one that you should go for? Clearly not justified on necessity. Secondly, let's talk about then whether it's a plausibly effective policy. Right, they tell us, oh, we're going to tax those companies and this is where we're getting money from. None of the teams are able to provide an answer on why those companies do not reallocate to the other part of the world. The answer is, oh, but the entire world does it. Well, my friends, like, then you need to climb that hill on government and show me why this is plausible event to happen. Like, this is way beyond the motion that is posed. If you want to do it, you should have climbed it. But then secondly, we're telling you, even in those companies, when those companies move, what they're likely to do, they're likely to squeeze the labor in developing countries to the extent that they reach the capacity and they reach the productivity they were experiencing with the machines. Like, even if you think that it's okay for them to move, and then it means that you're unable to tax them. But secondly, that has the negative effect on employment there when people are being squeezed there. Secondly, what we tell you is oftentimes these things are going to get more expensive in terms of products. Say, oh, but things didn't get more expensive now that automation was happening. Well, companies have a particular taste on passing on taxes when they don't like the taxes on a particular policy to make other people hurt for what they're being taxed on in order to incentivize them to go against the government. Like, when they don't like to be taxed on sugary drinks, or Coca-Cola doesn't want to be limited in how they're producing, what do? They pass it on to the consumer to incentivize the consumer to change things. This is where we're telling you, this is why they're likely to make their products more expensive. Most things are manufacturing. This is what is going into small and medium-sized companies producing items you use in your everyday life. This is what it means for farming. And they're saying, oh, but otherwise you would replace everything with a massive machine. Like, these farms still need to be productive to some extent. Like, you cannot return to fucking Stone Age. They're still going to be buying tractors anyway. So at that point, this is going to increase your margin. This means that on scale, lots of small and medium-sized companies are likely to mean unemployment. But then secondly, even with big companies, because they want to meet the margins that they had before and productivity they had before, and the speed with which they deliver, Amazon will still want to be the fastest deliverer in the world at the scale in which they are now. They're likely to squeeze their labor force more as well. So one, we're unclear as to why this improves employment overall, especially when a general equilibrium effect is tilted towards small and middle-sized companies in their multiplicity of scale. But secondly, it is unclear why this improves the lives of workers within the companies, especially when they're likely to be squeezed further due to the chase of the productivity that they have now lost. Now, before I go to externalities opening.
Okay, look, if companies have so much power over the economy, but also politics in general, don't you think that you will never be able to actually get UBI because they will be lobbying against you for all those reasons that you give them yourself?
I'm exactly in the mood for this. Let's talk about what kind of policies are companies likely to support. Look, what is important for a company, and what's like Ford famously recognized, is that you need purchasing power in between the people. This is why they're way more likely to support something that doesn't directly interfere with their production process, but something that talks about how government allocates money that it has anyway, and otherwise spending on other things. This is why companies are actively like supporting policies like UBI. This is why Andrew Yang was supported by companies. And you say, oh, but Andrew Yang didn't get into government. Yes, but Biden like literally flows out of his ideas. Like the movement has changed so much precisely because companies like Amazon, companies like Google are supporting a move towards the UBI because it doesn't mess with their margin, but at the same time allows them to still have the purchasing power we're talking about. And note, this is the mechanism for UBI that's missing on OO. This is where we clearly go over OO. Secondly, next externality we talk about how automation is oftentimes propelled by the companies that are the richest and the one that drive this development. We tell you is, importantly, when you don't develop those things, you're likely to have impacts on others, but also like even healthcare is slowly getting to be automated. You need to trade it off with less technology that is life-saving, but you also need to trade it off with less technology that is efficient because you still want to have people in there in the surgery rooms. Like, I don't know how you trade these negative effects off, but like it's pretty harsh. And then lastly, what we tell you is, look, oftentimes those, right. So what we basically tell you is this necessity is not justified. We don't know why this is the best policy or marginally the best policy. But secondly, we tell you it doesn't work, but likely screws over a whole bunch of people anyway. Vote C.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for a verifying speech and indeed all speakers for a verifying debate. I will now need to kindly ask you to leave the room. This is a reminder, a closed round, so we will not disclose the results just yet. Feel free to approach me or any of my very good wings after the break announcement. Best of luck.
Thanks everybody for the debate. It was fun.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, take a couple of minutes to go over